Welcome to Psych 105, Introduction to Psychology. We will begin our first chapter, Discovering Psychology. We will begin by taking a look at the biopsychosocial model. As you can see, there are three areas to this model that affect personality. So what do psychologists study? Psychology is the systematic scientific study of behaviors and mental processes. Behaviors refers to observable actions or responses in both humans and animals. The mental processes are not directly observable, and they refer to a wide range of complex studying, like dreaming. The four goals of psychology are to describe, explain, predict, and control. Take a few moments to look over in detail what these four goals involve. There are many approaches to studying psychology. The first one we will look at is biological approach. This focuses on our genes, hormones, nervous system, and how they interact with our environment to influence things like learning, personality, etc. For example, autism. We know that autism runs in families because it's supported by findings in identical twins. If one twin has autism, there's a 90% chance that the other will exhibit signs for autistic behavior. The second approach is cognitive approach. The cognitive approach examines how we process, store, and use information, and how this information influences what we attend to, perceive, learn, remember, believe, and feel. Basically, the cognitive approach is looking at what makes you think the way that you think. The third approach we will be looking at is the behavioral approach. This studies how organisms learn new behaviors or modify existing ones. It also looks at Albert Bandura, who was a theorist who disagreed with strict behavioralism. He formulated a theory that includes mental and cognitive processes in addition to observing behaviors, which then brought about social cognitive approach. Behaviors are influenced not only by the environmental events and the reinforcements, but also by observations, imitations, and thought processes. Therefore, modeling behavior can change behavior in someone else and can teach them what is expected and what would be more appropriate behavior. Anything you want to change, you can also observe modeling, and what Albert Bandura believed was that this plays a part in the cognitive processes. The psychoanalytical approach is based on the belief that childhood experiences greatly influence the development of later personality traits and psychological problems. It stresses the influence of unconscious fears, desires, and motivations, and how it affects thoughts, behaviors, and the development of personality traits and psychological problems later in life. The humanistic approach emphasizes that each individual has great freedom in directing his or her future, a large capacity for personal growth, and a considerable amount of intrinsic worth, and enormous potential for self-fulfillment. Finally, we will look at the cross-cultural approach. This examines the influence of culture and ethnic similarities and differences on psychological and social functioning of a culture's members. It's different in different countries. For example, in countries where autism is diagnosed. For instance, in the United States, symptoms were described 60 years ago and first thought to be caused by environmental factors, like cold parents, parents that were not emotionally affectionate toward their children. In 1960s, it changed into searching for a biological problem. Diagnosis begins at age 2 to 3 years of age. However, in China, autism was not recognized until 1987. Most Chinese believed that autism could not happen in infancy, and many Chinese parents were unaware of the infant's developmental stages, when social and verbal skills first develop. Chinese parents generally believed that infants would grow out of any difficulties. When looking at the culture in Germany in regards to autism, it was recognized in the late 1940s. Clinicians in Germany rarely diagnose autism in children younger than 5 years old. Efforts are underway to change this policy. In conclusion to cross-cultural approaches, Japan found that autism was first diagnosed in 1945. Japan has higher rates of autism than any other country, and the rates are continuing to rise. It was once thought that the cause was childhood vaccines, but this has been disproven. High rates may be due to Japanese clinicians' special efforts in detecting signs of autism in children as well as infants. Because psychology is such a broad area of study, it has been categorized in areas of specialization. Think of it like when you go to a doctor and you can go to a specialist who specializes in a particular area of the body, and this is kind of how the area of specialization is for psychology. The first area we're going to look at is the social psychology, and this involves the study of social interactions, stereotypes, attitudes, group behaviors, and aggression. Psychologists will study these things under the scope of social psychology. The next area is personality psychology. This involves the study of personality development, personality changes, assessments, abnormal behaviors. The next area of specialization that we will be looking at is developmental psychology. This is when we examine morals, social, emotional, and cognitive development through a person's lifespan. It's also experimental psychology. It includes areas of sensation, perception, learning, human performance, motivation, and emotions. This would be looking at the stages of each individual as they go through the stages of life, and looking at how over their lifespan they develop. Biological psychology is another area of specialization. It can also be referred to as psychobiology, and it involves research on the physical and chemical changes that occur during stress, learning, and emotions, as well as how our genetic makeup, our brain and nervous system interact with our environment and influence our behaviors. The last two areas of specialization we will look at is the cognitive psychology, and this involves how we process, store, and retrieve information, and how cognitive processes influence our behaviors. And finally, psychometrics, and that focuses on the measurement of people's abilities, skills, intelligence, personality, and their abnormal behaviors. So for instance, when you take an IQ test, measuring your IQ, that would be an example of psychometrics.